My name is Colette Marchetti, and I was 36 years old the night my future mother-in-law tried to buy my silence in front of 80 guests at the Hendricks Country Club in Charleston, South Carolina. She slid a folded document across the linen tablecloth and said it loud enough for the back tables to hear that I should sign it now. Before I took something that was never mine to take, I picked up the pen. Every eye at that table watched me, certain of exactly how this story ended. They thought the folder sitting in front of me was empty. What happened next, and why my father-in-law nearly knocked over his water glass standing up, is a story I still can't quite believe I lived. Welcome back to the channel. Friends, if you've ever been underestimated by the people who owed you the most, you're in the right place. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and hit subscribe. Because to understand that pen in my hand, you need to go back 4 years. To a warehouse, a sewing machine, and a promise I made to myself at 22. I own a company called Marchetti & Rowe. We manufacture custom upholstery and drapery for hotels, restaurants, and luxury developers across the Southeast. It is not glamorous work. Nobody puts a bolt of contract-grade velvet on a magazine cover. 9 years ago, it was one industrial sewing machine in a rented garage and me driving samples to job sites in a Honda with 190 miles on it. Today, it's a 22,000 square foot facility, 61 employees, and contracts with 4 hotel chains. When a new boutique hotel opens on the coast, there's a decent chance the curtains came from my floor. That business made me comfortable in a way most people would never guess by looking at me. I still drive an old Tacoma. I wear the same 3 flannel work shirts on the shop floor. My hands have calluses from the cutting tables. Money, for me, was always something you built quietly and never mentioned. Because every single time someone found out what I had, something in their face changed. The math started. The asking followed. A college boyfriend once told me I made him feel inadequate, and then spent a year making sure I felt smaller than him. So I learned to look like I had nothing. I let people assume the modest truck and the worn shirts were the whole story. I called it humility. It was armor. Then I met a man who never once asked what I made in a year. The armor started with my Aunt Rosa, who raised me after my mother passed when I was 11. Rosa cleaned office buildings at night for 26 years and never once acted like that made her less than the executives whose trash cans she emptied. She kept a small tin of sewing needles and a thimble worn smooth on one side. And she used to tell me, "Worth isn't given to you at a door. Colette, you stitch it yourself, one seam at a time. And nobody can rip that back out." She died when I was 20. And she left me almost nothing you could put a number on. She left me that thimble. It has ridden in my glove compartment through every contract I've ever signed. I met Nathaniel Vance on a Tuesday morning at a hardware store, both of us reaching for the last box of the same drywall screws. He taught 8th grade English at a public school 40 minutes outside the city, and had clearly never once asked anyone what they were worth. We stood in the aisle for 25 minutes, arguing about whether Times, The Great Gatsby Times, was actually a tragedy or a comedy dressed up as one. He had a coat with a torn pocket he hadn't bothered to fix. He looked at me like I was interesting, not like a number he was quietly totaling. I gave him my phone number, which I almost never did. I told myself it was because he loved books. Really, it was because for 25 minutes, nobody asked me the question that always ruined things. 2 years later, I understood exactly why he never asked. In his family, that question was only ever aimed at people they'd already decided to reject. I knew the Vance name before I knew Nathaniel. It was carved into the cornerstone of the Vance wing at the Regional Art Museum, and it hung beneath 3 generations of stern oil portraits at the Historical Society downtown. The Vances had owned a chain of textile mills once, before the mills closed in the 80s. Not flashy money-placed money. The kind of name that got you a table without a reservation. Nathaniel had walked away from all of it on purpose. Taking a teaching job his mother considered beneath the family. Building a small, quiet life that was entirely his own. "It's why I love you," he told me early on. "You have no idea who my family is. And you wouldn't care if you did." I laughed and agreed. I didn't care about the portraits. I did notice, even then, how carefully, he said, "Times my mother, times the way you'd name a storm system still out at sea." The first dinner was at the Vance family home outside Charleston. A grand old house that had clearly been magnificent once and was tired now in ways I noticed and pretended not to. Nathaniel's mother, Beatrice Vance, met me at the door in pearls and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. She held my hand a beat too long, studied my plain blazer, and asked warmly what I did for the Times hospitality industry. I said I owned a manufacturing company. "You mean you sew curtains?" she corrected, as if fixing a child's grammar, and the smile never wavered. At dinner, Nathaniel's sister Genevieve leaned in with the polite interest of a woman conducting a survey. "And your family, are they from around here?" I said. My aunt raised me. And she'd passed. "Oh," Genevieve said, and let the silence finish the sentence for her. Every question in that house had a floor under it. And the floor was always the same times. "Where do you come from? And is it anywhere at all?" I sat there, owner of a company with 61 employees on its payroll. And I said none of it. I let them believe the old Tacoma in the driveway was the whole story. I was auditioning for a part I didn't yet realize had already been cast as the outsider they'd need to keep in her place. Here's the truth I need you to understand. Or none of what follows makes sense. I never wanted the Vance money. There wasn't any to want. Though I didn't know that yet. What I wanted was the table. I grew up without cousins at Thanksgiving. Without a big, loud family arguing over the last piece of pie. I had built a company out of nothing because I'm good at building things out of nothing, but you cannot build a family that way. You have to be let in. So when Nathaniel got down on one knee in that same hardware store parking lot with a plain gold band he'd saved 4 months of a teacher's salary for, I said yes before he finished the sentence. I thought I was saying yes to him. In my heart. I was also saying yes to the whole house, the portraits, the cornerstone. Sunday dinners for the rest of my life. Beatrice examined my ring under the kitchen light like a jeweler searching for a flaw. "How sensible," she said, in a tone that made "times sensible times" sound like the ugliest word in the English language. Then she appointed herself wedding planner for a wedding I hadn't asked her to plan. It would be at the club. Obviously, the Vances always married at the club. The guest list was hers. Because there were people who simply had to be invited. When I asked about inviting my own shop foreman, she said we'd see about space. Everything I wanted was something we'd see about. Everything they wanted was already decided. What followed were the tests. Nobody called them that. But that's what they were: small, constant, deniable. Beatrice watched which fork I reached for and corrected me with a glance before I touched the wrong one. When I mentioned a documentary I loved, Genevieve said how fun in the voice you'd use for a toddler's crayon drawing. I've negotiated contracts with hotel developers who tried to bury me in fine print and never once felt as managed as I did at that dinner table. I finally said something to Nathaniel on the drive home. Not an accusation, just a small, tired truth. "Your mother doesn't like me." He sighed, the sigh of a man who'd spent 34 years managing this exact weather. "She's like that with everyone. Just don't give her anything to hold on to. Let her run the wedding. It's easier." I looked out the window and understood, for the first time, that the man I was going to marry had never once stood between me and his family. He loved me in every quiet way there was. He just couldn't seem to do it out loud. Genevieve invited me to coffee. Just us girls. She arrived with a leather folder and a warm smile. And within 10 minutes the questions turned into an audit. Where did I live? Did I rent? How many people worked for me? Roughly, was it seasonal? She wasn't trying to find out how much I had. She was trying to confirm how little. I gave her small, true, incomplete answers, and let her write the story she'd already decided on. I heard the word for the first time through a door I wasn't meant to be behind. Looking for a bathroom at the next family dinner, I passed Beatrice's study and heard her voice. Low and certain in a way she never used in front of guests. We need to protect this family. She's after what's left. A gold digger. Plain as that. What's left. You don't say that about a full account. You say it about a draining one. I stood in that hallway, holding my aunt's thimble in my coat pocket. And for the first time since I'd met the Vances, the ground shifted under everything I thought I knew about them. The next morning I called my attorney not to attack anyone, but to protect what I'd built. Colette, she said, you own a company worth 8 figures, and you have 0 legal protection. We fixed that before the wedding. Not after. So we did. We drafted a prenuptial agreement of my own. One that protected Marchetti and Rowe. My equipment. My properties. From anyone who might one day decide they were family property. I signed nothing yet. I just made sure I wouldn't walk into whatever came next with empty hands. I found out what's left meant on a rainy Saturday. Opening the wrong door at the Vance house looking for a powder room. It was Beatrice's study. On the wall hung a clean, bright rectangle in the middle of faded paint, the unmistakable ghost of a painting that used to be there. More pale patches circled the room. On the desk sat a short stack of mail, the top envelope stamped, "Past due," in red. And beneath it, the corner of an auction house appraisal notice. I stood very still, my fingers closing around the thimble in my pocket. And the whole story flipped over in my hands like a coin. They hadn't looked down on me because I had nothing. They'd looked down on me because I had something real. And they were quietly, desperately running out. Every insult changed flavor after that. It had never been about protecting a legacy. There was no legacy left to protect. It was about controlling the story in the room so nobody looked too closely at the empty walls. I still loved Nathaniel, the gentle man from the hardware store aisle, so I decided I wouldn't use what I knew. I kept my folder in a drawer and kept showing up smaller, hoping patience would finally open the door. The ultimatum arrived 3 weeks before the wedding. Dressed as a formality. Mom thinks we should have a prenup, Nathaniel said, looking at his shoes. Just to make everyone comfortable. When it arrived, I read it twice to be sure I understood. It wasn't a prenup in any fair sense, it was a surrender. In the event of divorce, everything I'd built before the marriage would become family property held in trust by the Vance estate. My company, my equipment, my aunt's thimble, for all they knew or cared. And the almost comic part was this: they still believed I owned nothing but a truck and a sewing hobby. This entire document was built to protect a fortune that no longer existed. From a fortune they didn't believe was real. I laid it flat on our kitchen table and asked Nathaniel one question. Do you know what this actually says? He read it. And instead of anger, instead of times, absolutely not. You're not signing this, he said, quietly. It's only paper. We both know we're never getting divorced. Just sign it and make her comfortable. And then we can be happy. I looked at the man I loved and understood he was asking me to sign my aunt's memory away so his mother could feel like she'd won. That night, I finally looked straight at my own life, the girl who learned that keeping people meant never threatening them. The woman who'd hidden her first real success like something shameful. Who'd driven a beat-up truck on purpose and let every person she loved believe a smaller version of the truth. The armor hadn't protected me. The armor was the wound. My aunt didn't raise me to shrink. She raised me to build. So in the morning, I called my attorney again, this time not out of fear, but clarity. I asked her to prepare a full financial disclosure, the real numbers, the company valuation, the properties, laid out plainly for anyone who cared to read them. And I finalized my own prenuptial agreement. The one that protected what I'd actually built. Genevieve let it slip a week later, confirming the rehearsal dinner headcount. 80 people. All the important names. Everyone will be there to watch you officially join the family. She said, smiling with teeth. I understood then exactly what that dinner was built to be. Not a celebration. A stage. They intended to hand me their document in front of 80 of the oldest names in Charleston. At the precise moment, refusing would look like the tantrum of an ungrateful outsider. If they wanted 80 witnesses, they were going to get 80 witnesses. Just not to what they'd planned. The night before the rehearsal dinner, I sat alone at my kitchen table with my aunt's thimble and my folder, and I made myself one quiet promise: whatever happened tomorrow, I would not walk into that room smaller than I actually was. The club was beautiful the way a stage set is beautiful. If you know where to look. I knew where to look now. Beatrice worked the room like the performance of her life. At the head table, Nathaniel's father, Walter, sat mostly silent, watching me with something almost like an apology in his eyes. It happened between the salad course and the toast. Beatrice rose, tapped her glass, thanked everyone for coming, spoke gracefully about legacy and protecting what generations had built, and then she reached under her place setting, drew out the document, and slid it across the tablecloth to me. Before you join this family, dear, we just need you to sign this. A pause. Timed for maximum reach. Sign it. Gold digger. You bring nothing to this family. The room didn't gasp. It went still, the way a room does right before a verdict. I looked down at the document. Then I looked up, smiled, and picked up the pen. I did not sign. I read it out loud. In the event of dissolution of the marriage, I read, calm and clear. The party of the second part shall relinquish all claim to assets and convey any business interests to the Vance family trust. I looked up. That's me. Everything I've built, signed over to your family. Is that right? Beatrice, her smile flickered. Because this wasn't the script. I let the pen hover over the signature line and let the whole room lean in, certain they were about to watch me surrender. Then I set the pen down, reached into my coat, and laid a plain folder on the table. It's missing one thing, I said. A fair agreement shows both people's numbers. So let me show you mine. I read the company name, the 61 employees, the 4 hotel chains, the valuation, and I heard, somewhere behind me, a fork touch a plate and go still. I laid down page after page the properties I owned outright, the accounts, the contracts. You said I bring nothing to this family, I said quietly. Let's read what nothing actually looks like. At the head table, Walter Vance rose halfway out of his chair, both hands flat on the linen, because he understood before anyone else in that room exactly which family had been marrying up. I could have laid my own findings on that table too, the past due notices, the empty walls, the auction appraisal. It would have been easy, and it would have made me exactly what they'd called me. So I didn't. I placed only my own prenuptial agreement on the table and said, I brought a document too. Mine protects what I made, from anyone who ever decides it's theirs. I was going to sign it and marry into this family anyway, because I wanted to belong here more than I wanted to be safe. Then I stood, and I set the pen down for good. I'm not signing yours, I told Beatrice, and I'm not marrying into a performance. Nathaniel, I'll marry you Monday morning at the courthouse, with nothing changing hands but a promise. Or I'll wish you a good life and go build mine. But I am done earning a seat at a table that put a price on me. The room was silent. Nathaniel stood. He looked at his mother, then at me. And for the first time in 2 years, he walked around the table, took my hand in front of everyone, and turned to her. You just showed this entire room exactly who values what in this family. We married that Monday at the county courthouse. 2 of my shop foremen stood as witnesses. Nathaniel wore his coat with the torn pocket. Never fixed. Walter came, stood quietly at the back, and afterward held my hand in both of his. We were the ones marrying up. He said, "I'm sorry it took me this long to say it. Beatrice didn't come. I found I didn't need her to." Marchetti and Rowe took on 2 more hotel chains that year. Nathaniel kept teaching and slowly learned to stand in front of me instead of politely beside me. I framed my aunt's thimble and hung it on the wall of my office, right where the morning light hits it. First, not hidden in a glove compartment anymore. Not something to apologize for. Here's the only lesson I took from all of it: worth isn't something you inherit at a table someone else sets. It's something you build with your own 2 hands. And nobody, no matter whose name is carved over a museum wing, gets to slide it back across the tablecloth and call it nothing. That's my story. A folder I almost didn't open. A pen I picked up and then set back down. If anyone has ever made you feel like you brought nothing to the table, tell me in the comments what you built with your own 2 hands and say it loud. If this story reached you, share it with a woman who needs to hear it today. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.